decided not to use slides because I'm fed up with using slides almost every day in my job. So give me a break and I'll give you guys a break as well. 3 speakers. Where shall I start? Well, I graduated here in 2003 with the last 2 speakers. And 2002 was a pretty horrible year to start applying for jobs because we just had the dot-com bubble burst. So all of the banks, certainly some of the investment managers as well, suddenly scaled back their recruitment quite aggressively. And it's exactly the same thing happened in 2008, as this sort of Ed was mentioning as well. So as we then came towards the end of our degrees in 2003, many of us did decide to go on and do a master's, which is exactly what I did as well, not here at the University of Southampton. But one of the interesting things that I found was that in the time that I spent applying for jobs before I'd actually graduated, compared to the period of time after I graduated, you suddenly saw a big difference in the success rate for getting interviews. There's a big difference between actually having a degree and saying you're going to get a degree, believe it or not. I think I applied for about 130 different jobs. I kept a nice big spreadsheet, as good economists should do. I had something along the lines of 20 interviews and 3 final round interviews, and was offered nothing. And that ranged from economic consultancies, banks, investment banks, investment houses, even accountancy jobs, believe it or not. I just had to speak that out. But as soon as I got my degree, all of a sudden, the success rate went up to about 50%. So don't get too disheartened if you're not finding success this early on. It does get better at a later point. A master's does help, and I personally found that because I was enjoying my final year of study, I wanted to continue with those additional subjects. So we're moving away from the core macro and micro into some of the more specialist subjects out there. So I went off and did that, finished, but then again, when I did graduate, things were still a little bit slow. The first job I took was with a consultancy group called Hyam. It had nothing to do with economics, it was all to do with mortgage endowment complaints, which you're all too young to know about, unfortunately. I did that for literally 2 months and then was headhunted by the Financial Ombudsman Service, who are essentially the body that this company dealt with. So they liked the idea that I was still young, had a good degree, an economics degree of course, and that I was in the right sort of area of work. I only did that for about 9 months or so because I was trying to get a job as an economist at the Treasury. But that's your second lesson, is that sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you expect to get to where you want to be. And actually that shouldn't be a deterrent for you. The right type of office work environment is actually very useful and very valuable when you come to then apply for jobs. So I then joined the Treasury, and in my first job there I was an assistant economist within the European economics team. I was in charge of the 10 accession countries joining the EU at the time. Everything to do with policy towards them. So everything to do with their macroeconomics, microeconomic reforms, anything to do with migration, that all came through me, and that's what I was in charge of. Which was fascinating. And the nice thing about joining the civil service is you get a tremendous amount of experience and training very early on. You wouldn't imagine getting that level of responsibility at such a young age, other than in government. Partly because the staff are too stretched and they're not prepared to pay very much. But that's the reality that we face. I mean, I'll tell you a story. Who knows who Alan Greenspan is? Yeah, quite a few of you. I met him in my second day on the job at the Treasury, which was amazing. You know, one of the most important people out there, and that's the kind of people you're exposed to very early on. So I worked under Gordon Brown, and then later on, Alistair Darling as well. As James mentioned, you do spend a fair bit of time rotating jobs within the civil service. So I moved from the European team into a UK-based team, and I was in charge of analysing and helping to forecast the business sector in the UK. So forecasting how much business investment we were seeing, but also forecasting the net trade positions, exports, incomes, foreign direct investment, everything to do with the UK's balance of payments. And it was always very satisfying to see your analysis being published within the budget report, for example. And that then eventually driving forward government policy. So all very rewarding. But around sort of well, it was early on in 2009, I decided that it was time for a change, and I started looking for jobs outside of the civil service. And again, it was a very tough time because we were about to head into one of the biggest financial crises since the Great Depression. The great thing is that these financial crises are fantastic for economists because nobody understands what's going on. And I promise you, the previous 10 years, the economy was the most boring thing of anything. You know, the economy just continued to grow at a steady pace. There was no business cycle. It didn't really matter what the economy did, the markets just went up. And that should have been an early warning sign for most investors out there, but clearly they didn't catch it. So economists were suddenly back in demand. And I decided not to join an investment bank. I decided to join an asset manager instead. Key difference being, investment banks tend to focus more on the trade element of a transaction, whereas the asset managers are those that actually look after most of the money in the long term. So for example, you are the head of BT's pension fund and you need to invest some of that money. You will come to an asset manager like Schroders and choose the funds you want to invest in. And then when Schroders chooses to trade, they will trade through an investment bank or brokerage. And that's generally how the kind of system works. Now, of course, when people are concerned and scared about the economy and markets, they tend not to invest. And so, well, it doesn't really matter for the asset manager because they take their fee every year anyway on the money they manage. But for the investment banks, if people stop trading, they stop making money. And so bear that in mind if you are looking to go into an investment bank. It is probably slightly more rewarding. You will work longer hours, but it's a much more volatile career that you will have, especially if things start going wrong on the microphone. So what do I do today? Well, I spend most of my time essentially telling our fund managers and clients how best to invest at a macro level. I'm not going around and telling people to buy Vodafone versus Orange or another company like that. What I do is I look at the fundamentals of most macro economies, and then I try to work out what price that the market has placed on certain scenarios playing out. So for example, when Greece was on the verge of leaving the Eurozone only a few years ago, at one point the market was fully priced in for that eventual departure and default. And we felt that actually this was unlikely to happen because eventually governments would step in and bail them out. So we decided to take an opposite bet, if you like, in the market. And that was the kind of advice. So that gives you a little bit of a feel of what I have to do. But in terms of how I do it, we go through and analyse the major economies around the world. I personally cover Europe, which is supposed to be Spain, Italy, France and Germany, but it's more recently become Ireland and Greece and Portugal, and the little countries that most people don't care about most of the time. And I'm also in charge of the UK economy as well. I have a colleague who covers the US and Japan, and a new colleague that covers Brazil, Russia, India and China as the emerging market. As some of the others mentioned earlier, communication is very important. I spend a lot of time presenting to both our fund managers, explaining how we're thinking about the world and how they should invest, but also to our clients as well. And the nice thing about our team at Schroders is that we're actually independent of all the funds. We have no bias about whether you should be in equities or bonds or property. We couldn't care less. And I'll happily say right now that you shouldn't be investing in government bonds, for example. That's my view. Now, the government bond fund manager is not going to be too happy about me saying that, but that's his problem. I'm here as an independent person within the company, and that's fantastic for our clients because they can then trust the advice that we give them. So we do a lot of presentations. We travel across the world. Schroders has offices literally across the entire globe, including recently Bermuda as well, which is a great place to go to when you're forced. And I'm just pleased actually the crisis hit countries were in the Mediterranean area, so where the weather's nicer at this time of year. The other thing we do is we publish research. We write a monthly note, which actually was published yesterday. If you're interested, you can find that on the Schroders Talking Point website. It'll give you a bit of an idea of how we kind of approach economics and how we then turn that into investment ideas as well. So I'll stop there and give everybody a chance to ask us questions.